Welcome to Murder Mystery Files. Join us on a thrilling journey into the dark world of murder mysteries with our new channel. From unsolved crimes to notorious killers, we'll provide in-depth analysis and commentary on some of the most captivating cases in history. Subscribe now to unveil the secrets with us and unlock the truth behind these heinous acts. So please, if you like what you see, remember to subscribe to our channel and tick that notification bell to be the first to find out when new cases drop. In this week's episode, we go back to the crime of John Reginald Christie. The murders committed by John Reginald Christie at 10 Rillington Place are among the most notorious crimes in British history. Christie, a serial killer and rapist, was responsible for the deaths of at least 8 people, including women and children. This essay will examine the life of John Christie, the events leading up to the murders, the investigation, and the aftermath of the case. Background of John Reginald Christie. John Reginald Christie was born in Halifax, West Yorkshire, England, on April 8, 1899. He was the 6th of 7 children born to Ernest and Mary Christie. Christie's childhood was marked by poverty and hardship, and he left school at the age of 15 to work as an apprentice plumber. Christie's work as a plumber would later become significant, as it provided him with the knowledge and skills to commit his crimes. In 1920, Christie joined the British Army and served in World War I. He was discharged in 1923 and returned to civilian life, where he struggled to find stable employment. Christie married Ethel Simpson in 1920, but the marriage was not a happy one, and the couple separated in 1929. Christie had a series of relationships with women over the years, but none of them lasted long. Christie's criminal record began in 1921 when he was convicted of stealing some postal orders from his employer. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison. In 1924, Christie was convicted of stealing some car tires and was sentenced to 9 months in prison. These convictions would be the first of many for Christie, who would go on to commit a range of crimes, including burglary, theft, and assault. In 1933, Christie moved to London and took up residence at 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill. The house was a small, run-down property that was divided into flats. Christie lived on the top floor with his wife, Ethel, who he had reconciled with. Christie became known in the local community as a strange and reclusive figure, and rumors began to circulate about his involvement in illegal activities, the murders. The first known murder committed by John Christie was that of Ruth Fürst, a prostitute who Christie had met at a cafe in Soho. Christie lured Fürst back to his flat at 10 Rillington Place, where he strangled her and buried her body in the garden. The murder took place in 1943, but it would be another 6 years before Christie was caught. In 1944, Christie met a woman named Muriel Eady, who was looking for a place to stay. Christie offered Eddie a room in his flat, and she accepted. Over the next few weeks, Christie drugged and sexually assaulted Eddie several times. On one occasion, he told her that he had killed his wife, Ethel, and buried her in the garden. Eady became frightened and left the flat, but she did not report Christie to the police. In 1949, Christie met a couple named Timothy and Beryl Evans, who had recently moved into a flat in the same building as Christie. Timothy Evans was a simple man with a low IQ, and Beryl was pregnant with their second child. Christie offered to help the couple with their money troubles by performing an illegal abortion on Beryl. However, the abortion went wrong, and Beryl died. Christie then killed the couple's infant daughter, Geraldine, and buried both bodies in the garden. Timothy Evans was blamed for the murders and was subsequently arrested and charged with the killings. He was convicted and hanged in 1950. John Reginald Christie's murder spree didn't end with the execution of Timothy Evans in 1950. In fact, he continued to kill and conceal bodies in his apartment at 10 Rillington Place until 1953 when he was finally caught. In 1952, Christie murdered his neighbor, Rita Nelson, and buried her body in his garden. He later killed Kathleen Maloney, who was a tenant in the flat above him. Maloney's body was also buried in the garden. Christie's last victim was Hectorina McLennan, a Scottish woman who had moved to London to look for work. Christie offered to help her find a place to stay, and she agreed to move into his flat. McLennan was last seen alive on December 6, 1952. Christie later confessed to killing her, and her body was found hidden under the floorboards of the living room. After McLennan's disappearance, her sister reported her missing to the police. The police searched Christie's flat and found evidence of his crimes, including a stash of women's clothing and jewelry. They also found human remains hidden in the walls and floors of the apartment. Christie was arrested and put on trial for the murder of Hectorina McLennan. He initially tried to blame Timothy Evans for the murders, but this time, the police didn't believe him. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Christie was hanged on July 15, 1953, at Pentonville Prison. The case of Timothy Evans being blamed for the Rillington Place murders is a tragic example of a miscarriage of justice. Evans was a simple man with a low IQ who had moved into a flat in the same building as John Christie, the real killer. When the bodies were discovered, Christie tried to blame Evans for the murders. He claimed that Evans had killed Beryl and the baby and had asked him to dispose of the bodies. On the 30th of November 1949, Evans informed police at Merthyr Tydfil that his wife had died in unusual circumstances. His first confession was that he had accidentally killed her by giving her something in a bottle that a man had given him to abort the fetus. He had then disposed of her body in a sewer drain outside 10 Rillington Place. He told the police that after arranging for Geraldine to be looked after, he had gone to Wales. When police examined the drain outside the front of the building, however, they found nothing, and furthermore discovered that the manhole cover required the combined strength of 3 officers to remove it. When re-questioned, Evans changed his story and said that Christie had offered to perform an abortion on Beryl. Evans stated that he had left Christie out of his first statement in order to protect him, abortion being illegal in the UK at this time. After some deliberation between Evans and his wife, they had both agreed to take up Christie's offer. On the 8th of November, Evans had returned home from work to be informed by Christie that the abortion had not worked and that Beryl was dead. Christie had said that he would dispose of the body and would make arrangements for a couple from East Acton to look after Geraldine. He said that Evans should leave London for the meantime. On the 14th of November, Evans left for Wales to stay with relatives. Evans said he later returned to 10 Rillington Place to ask about Geraldine, but Christie had refused to let him see her. In response to Evans's second statement, the police performed a preliminary search of 10 Rillington Place, but did not uncover anything incriminating, despite the presence of a human thigh bone supporting a fence post in the tiny garden. On a more thorough search on the 2nd of December, the police found the body of Beryl Evans, wrapped in a tablecloth in the washhouse in the back garden. Access to the locked washhouse was only possible by using a knife kept by Mrs. Christie. Significantly, the body of Geraldine was also found alongside Beryl's body. Evans had not mentioned he had killed his daughter in either of his statements. Beryl and Geraldine had both been strangled. Although they examined the garden, the police did not find traces of the skeletal remains of 2 prior victims of Christie, despite their shallow burial. Christie actually removed the skull of Miss Edie when his dog dug it up from the garden around this time, and he disposed of it in a bombed-out building nearby. This vital clue was ignored when the skull was then discovered by children playing in the ruins and handed in to police. When Evans was shown the clothing taken from the bodies of his wife and child, he was also informed that both had been strangled. This was, according to Evans's statement, the first occasion in which he was informed that his baby daughter had been killed. He was asked whether he was responsible for their deaths. To this, Evans apparently responded, yes. He then apparently confessed to having strangled Beryl during an argument over debts and strangling Geraldine 2 days later, after which he left for Wales. This confession, along with other contradictory statements Evans made during the police interrogation, has been cited as proof of his guilt. Several authors who have written about the case have argued that the police provided Evans with all the necessary details for him to make a plausible confession, which they may have in turn edited further while transcribing it. Furthermore, the police interrogated Evans over the course of late evening and early morning hours to his physical and emotional detriment, a man already in a highly emotional state. Evans later stated in court that he thought he would be subjected to violence by the police if he did not confess, and this fear, along with the shock of discovering that both his wife and daughter had been strangled, likely induced him to make a false confession. Evans was arrested and charged with the murders. He was put on trial, and the prosecution presented a case based on circumstantial evidence. The jury was also influenced by the testimony of Christie, who had been called as a witness. Christie testified that Evans had confessed to the murders and had shown him the bodies. Despite Evans's protests of innocence, he was found guilty of the murders and sentenced to death. He was hanged in 1950. However, the case did not end there. In 1953, John Christie was arrested for the murder of another woman, and he eventually confessed to the Rillington Place murders. Christie's confession confirmed what many had suspected all along, that Evans was innocent and had been wrongly convicted. The case sparked a public outcry, and there were calls for an inquiry into the handling of the case. In 1955, a new inquiry was launched, and the findings confirmed that Evans had been wrongly convicted. The inquiry found that the police had not properly investigated Christie's role in the murders and had not followed up on crucial leads. It also criticized the way in which the trial had been conducted and the way in which the jury had been influenced by Christie's testimony. The inquiry concluded that the case was a grave miscarriage of justice. The case of Timothy Evans highlights the dangers of relying on circumstantial evidence and the importance of a fair trial. It also highlights the need for a thorough investigation into all aspects of a case, including the possible involvement of other suspects. The tragedy of Evans's wrongful conviction is compounded by the fact that the real killer, John Christie, was able to continue his murderous activities for several more years before being caught. One important fact was not brought up in Evans's trial. 2 workmen were willing to testify that there were no bodies in the wash house when they worked there several days after Evans supposedly hid them. They stored their tools in the washroom and cleaned it out completely when they finished their work on the 11th of November. Their evidence would have raised doubts about the veracity of Evans's alleged confessions, but the workmen were not called to give evidence. Indeed, the police re-interviewed the workmen and forced them to change their evidence to fit the preconceived idea that Evans was the sole murderer. The murderer, Christie, would have hidden the bodies of Beryl and Geraldine in the temporarily vacant first-floor flat and then moved them to the wash house 4 days later when the workmen had finished. I thank you for listening to our true crime story about the crimes of John Reginald Christie. Join us next time for more gruesome true crime stories.